Russia in the second half of the 1600s was a land caught between light and shadow. It was a country vast enough to swallow empires whole, yet fragile as glass beneath the weight of famine, rebellion, and faith. Endless forests stretched like oceans of pine, dark and whispering with unseen spirits. Golden domes of Orthodox churches rose above wooden towns, their bells tolling across frozen rivers like voices of eternity. Villages lay frozen in time, where each season repeated like the ticking of an eternal clock. Here, miracles and misery walked side by side. A peasant might starve one day and swear he saw a weeping icon the next. A monk might spend years illuminating holy scrolls by candlelight, only to watch them burned in the fury of religious reform. This is the story of their world, Russia, 1650 to 1700, a time of dread, survival, hidden knowledge, and the first sparks of a new dawn. Most Russians were peasants, and most peasants were serfs, bound to the land as tightly as the roots of rye in the black soil. The Great Law Code of 1649 had sealed their fate. Before, there had been whispers of mobility, of escape to the south, to the Cossack lands along the Volga or Don. But now the law had closed that door forever. To be born a peasant was to inherit chains of soil and sweat passed from father to son, mother to daughter. Serfs were listed in estate ledgers not as citizens but as souls. A landlord could count them as one might count cattle or sacks of grain. To be sold was no stranger than to sell a horse, and yet the earth itself was both master and companion. The fields had to be ploughed whether the soil promised life or only dust. The seasons were tyrants. Spring demanded labor, summer demanded sweat, autumn demanded sacrifice, and winter demanded endurance. When famine came, it came not as a whisper but as a storm. In 1650, food riots erupted in Pskov and Novgorod. Grain was hoarded by merchants, prices soared, and the hungry rose against the rich. For weeks, commoners held the cities, believing, if only for a moment, that hunger could be overthrown. But the Tsar's soldiers arrived, steel flashing like lightning. The rebellion was drowned in blood, its leaders broken on the wheel. Yet the hunger did not vanish. Peasants learned early. Survival in Russia was not a right. It was a battle waged each morning with bread as the prize. If you stepped inside a peasant's izba, the air would be thick with smoke and warmth. These wooden huts were humble fortresses against the brutal winters. At the center stood the great clay stove, pechka, wide enough for a man to sleep upon, hot enough to bake bread, dry clothes, and sometimes cure sickness. Families huddled together on its warm surface. Even livestock sometimes shared the shelter. The walls told stories too, herbs drying in bundles, icons in the corner glowing with candlelight, tools passed down for generations. It was a world stitched together from wood, clay, and faith. Meals were plain: cabbage soup, rye bread, millet porridge. But famine twisted the menu into strange shapes. Bread stretched with moss, bark, or acorns, flour made from ground peas or chestnuts. Children chewed birch tar to quiet hunger pangs. Few chronicles recorded these desperate recipes, but they were the difference between life and death. The forest was more than wilderness. It was the secret pantry and apothecary. Mushrooms dried on strings by the hearth, wild berries sweetened rare festivals, and herbs like St. John's wort, wormwood, and yarrow became medicine. Few today know that peasants stopped bleeding with spiderwebs pressed into wounds, or that willow bark boiled into tea calmed fevers centuries before aspirin. Festivals brought bursts of colour to this grey life. Maslenitsa, the butter festival, filled the last days before Lent with sleigh rides, dancing, bonfires, and endless stacks of pancakes. For a few days, even the poorest laughed like kings, hurling snowballs instead of curses, singing as though famine had never existed. Stories, too, were a feast. Around the stove, peasants recited Bailini, epic songs of ancient heroes. In them, warriors rode magical horses, fought giants, and defied impossible odds. These tales were more than entertainment. They were a kind of survival, carrying hope across generations when bread could not. Religion was the heartbeat of Russia, steady and unyielding. Icons, painted images of Christ and the saints, were more than wood and paint. To peasants, they breathed, they glowed, they wept. A flicker of candlelight across the gilded surface could feel like a miracle. Some icons were believed to heal the sick, others were said to bleed or shine with unearthly light when famine or plague struck. Villagers carried icons in solemn processions, praying that painted eyes might gaze kindly on their misery. But faith was not only comfort, it was fire, and fire divides. In the 1650s, Patriarch Nikon reformed the church. He changed small rituals, how many fingers to use when crossing oneself, how to spell the name of Jesus, how to bow in prayer. To outsiders, these changes were tiny. But to Russians, they cut eternity itself. If your prayer was wrong, your soul was wrong. The faithful split. The old believers clung to the old rituals, crying that the Antichrist had seized the church. Some fled into forests, forming secret communities. Others, in their fury, locked themselves inside wooden churches and set them aflame, choosing fire over betrayal. Meanwhile, monasteries became both sanctuaries and vaults of hidden knowledge. Within their walls, monks copied scrolls on astronomy, alchemy, and medicine. A curious soul might read about the stars or the secret powers of plants. Knowledge the outside world considered dangerous. Faith in Russia could warm the heart, guide the soul, or burn the body to ash. Hardship breeds anger, and in Russia that anger often boiled into rebellion. Taxes were heavy, wars endless, and famine relentless. Cossacks, frontier warriors who roamed the rivers, became the lightning rod of unrest. The most famous of them all was Stenka Razin, a legend wrapped in flesh. He promised freedom. No nobles, no masters, only brotherhood under the wide sky of the Volga. In 1670, Razin's ragged army swelled to tens of thousands. Peasants, runaway serfs, even whole villages joined his cause. They stormed towns, seized fortresses, and at Astrakhan declared it free. For a moment, Russia trembled. For a moment, peasants tasted what freedom might be. But the dream shattered. Betrayal crept in. Razin was captured, dragged in chains to Moscow, and executed in the square. His body was broken, but his name lived on. For centuries afterward, peasants sang ballads of Stenka Razin. In their songs, he was not defeated. He was immortal, sailing the Volga forever, waiting to return. Even in misery, the world crept in with strange wonders. Foreign merchants brought inventions from Europe, clocks that ticked like iron hearts, telescopes that revealed moons and stars, books filled with ideas that questioned everything. In Moscow's German quarter, Russians saw dances, food and clothing unlike anything they had known. Some embraced it, some feared it. Tsar Alexis, alarmed at tobacco, banned it under penalty of death. But pipes still smoked in secret taverns, their smoke curling like rebellion in the rafters. Few know that Russia's first printed newspaper, Vedomosti, was born in this age. News of wars, plagues, and even comets streaking across the night sky reached hands that had never touched a printed page before. Knowledge seeped into Russia like water under a locked door, impossible to stop, impossible to control. If daylight was ruled by czars and priests, the night belonged to older powers. Peasants lived with a world of unseen spirits. The domovoi, a household guardian, was fed bread or porridge to keep peace in the izba. Rivers and lakes were haunted by rusalki, water maidens who lured men to drowning. The forest itself was alive, ruled by the fearsome leshi, who could lead wanderers astray until they vanished forever. Witches and healers walked a fine line. Some were shunned, others secretly sought out. A whispered charm or herbal brew could save a sick child, or curse a neighbor's crops. This hidden spiritual map was rarely written, but it guided peasant lives as firmly as the Tsar's decrees. In the final decades of the century, amid famine, rebellion, and faith's fire, a boy grew restless. His name was Peter, son of Tsar Alexis, grandson of famine and war. Unlike princes before him, Peter loved not silks or ceremonies, but ships, cannons, and foreign maps. He roamed the German quarter of Moscow, watching foreigners build ships, studying their tools, learning their dances and songs. His hands grew rough with sawdust and rope. He built toy fleets on ponds, then real ships on rivers. Peter was born of the old Russia, but his gaze was set on the new. He would become Peter the Great, the storm that dragged Russia into modernity. From 1650 to 1700, Russia was a land of fire and frost, miracles and misery. Peasants struggled like trees in a storm, roots deep but branches breaking. Priests burned for faith, rebels dreamed of freedom, hidden scrolls whispered of science and stars, and in the shadows, spirits and stories shaped every choice. It was a country at a crossroads, half in darkness, half in light. Few knew it then, but a dawn was breaking.